The Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management is the confederation of the world's major PR and communication management associations and institutions, representing over 280,000 practitioners and academics across 126 countries worldwide.
A not-for-profit organization, Global Alliance relies on the efforts of communication professionals to tackle common problems with a global perspective.
The Global Alliance's mission is to unify the public relations profession, raise professional standards all over the world, share knowledge for the benefit of its members, and be the global voice for public relations in the public interest.
By partnering with regional, national and international bodies to increase professionalism in public relations and communication management, this alliance works to enhance the collaborative competence of the industry among its constituents around the world.
Global Alliance is at the forefront of the representation of PR and communication management as a profession in which the importance of ethical behaviour is unquestionable. The development of a global protocol on ethics for public relations and the requirement that all Global Alliance members ratify it demonstrates this commitment to integrity.
The Global Alliance's vision is to enhance the role and value of public relations and communication management to organisations and to global society.
Joining Global Alliance gives you the opportunity to engage with the world's communication professionals and benefit from special discounts from member conferences around the world.
The World Public Relations Forum,
Regional conferences,
Association Leaders Workshops,
networking with world members,
participation in our Self-Assessment Global Capabilities Framework.
Expand your knowledge with the PRSA Learning Platform and keep up to date on world trends and insights with Global Alliance's monthly newsletter.
Set professional standards with the global principles of ethical practice in PR and communication management. And be informed with the Global Communications Report.
Join our Global Alliance Board or one of our 6 regional councils: Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, India, Middle East, Latin America, and North America.
So now you know. Go global, be global, and join Global Alliance. Hello, I'm Justin Green, President and CEO of Global Alliance. And I want to wish you a good morning, afternoon, good evening, or even good night, because wherever you are around the world, we have over 500 people joining us this week who are young practitioners and young students. And it's not only a huge occasion for you, but it's a huge occasion for the whole industry, because this is the first time ever such a number of young practitioners and students have come together to engage and to give your views and insights, which are essential for the future of public relations. And the reason that it's so essential is because you are the future of public relations. And today we hand you the torch to continue our profession, to build the standards, to spread our ethical standards around the world. So this is a huge occasion for the profession, as well as everyone participating here today. And I'd like to wish you all the best for this conference. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you to all the countries, to all our associations, to all our members right around the world for making this happen. So from here in Dublin, thank you. Have a great week, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone joining us today. This is the 4th and last day of the Impact, the Global Youth Public Relations and Communications Convention, the first ever online international convention convening current and future PR and communications practitioners to collaborate and learn from the thought leaders we've heard from for the last few days, and we're about to hear from now. I'm Peter Finn. I'm the Executive Director of the International Association of Business Communicators, based in Chicago. I will be your moderator for today's session, maximizing your personal brand, a topic that is certainly of high relevance and importance for all communication and PR professionals. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers for today. Jacqueline Strayer is a consultant and C-suite executive and founder of global brand Convergence. She's also the graduate faculty member of New York University and Columbia University. She's currently writing her first book and will be launching, which is very exciting, the Global Brand Convergence in 2022, which I think we'll hear a little bit about towards the end of the presentation. And this focuses on establishing a global connected community to share ideas, innovations, and new concepts in the practice. And she's also the creator of the trademarked digital narrative, The 90-Second You, which I believe we'll also hear a little bit about. She believes that everyone has a great story to tell. And presenting with Jacqueline today is Mei Zhu, who I believe is also a former student of Jacqueline's. Mei is a human-first, data-driven global digital marketer originally from China, who moved to attend New York University. Her background includes studies in a range of disciplines, economics, psychology, and business studies. So let's give them a warm welcome. I'm really excited about this presentation, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Over to you, Jacqueline and Mei.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that wonderful introduction. And it's a real pleasure for both of us to be with you. I'm coming from New York City, and Mei is coming from London. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so let me just get my PowerPoint up here. Okay, so hopefully that's clear for everyone. So we're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about you. And so and in this conversation, we're going to focus on actually cultivating and creating and advancing or reinventing your personal brand. And so I'd like to start this presentation off a little bit with a couple of quotes that I think really pertain to our subject. The first one is from the Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset. And he says, basically, tell me what you pay attention to, and I will tell you who you are. That's a really provocative and interesting quote. And actually, one of the things that I like to do in my workshops, my longer workshops, is we actually look at what did we Google? What are the top 20 things we Googled in the last hour or 2 hours. And that says a lot about what we're interested in, what we seek information on, and what we're actually paying attention to. The other quote that I really like as we think about this is the one from the writer George Eliot. It is never too late to be who you might have been. And what I find when we talk about personal brand is sometimes people feel like they haven't done a really great job in terms of advancing their brand. And they think, oh, it's too late. And it might be a student in my class who's 25 years old, or it might be somebody who's older. But regardless, whoever you are, it's never too late to actually create who you want to be and how you want to advance that. So we're going to be talking about that a lot today. So what is personal brand? And there's a lot of I think, interesting aspects in terms of how somebody might define this. My definition is basically to conceptualize two intersecting circles. One circle is how you see yourself. And that includes the qualities and the characteristics that you think define you, and also an aspirational sense in terms of who you're actually trying to become. The other circle is one that intersects with your circle, which is how other people are seeing you, how they perceive you. That intersection, that overlap of those two circles is where your personal brand sits. So it's this place in the middle here. One of the important things in terms of actually working on your personal brand is to increase this space. So the way you're seeing yourself and the way that other people are seeing you is actually overlapping to a greater degree. And that's what we want to try and influence, this space right here. So as we look at this, I love to think of this quote from Andy Warhol, which was written decades ago. And if there's something that this great artist and iconic person knew, he knew brand. And in his quote, he basically says, a Coke is a Coke, and no matter the amount of money you get, better Coke than the one on the street is drinking, or all the Cokes are the same and all the Cokes are good. Liz Taylor knows it, the president knows it, the bum knows it, and you know it. And basically, when we think about a brand, we think about a brand in terms of it being an experience. And that's something that we're going to kind of continue to discuss. You are an experience. The important message about a Coke is that no matter who drinks it, we're all drinking the same thing and we're having the same experience, whether you're the bum on the street or the president of the United States. So as we think about brands, one of the things that in this process of thinking about personal brand, I got into this topic really quite by accident. I started teaching at NYU 6 years ago, and the first course that I was teaching was a course called Critical Business Skills for Public Relations. And that course was really about all the skills that you need to be successful in the PR practice that are not PR skills. And so one of the lectures in this semester was on personal brand. And the person that was going to guest lecture, because this was not a topic that I really would do a lot about, he at the last minute couldn't make it. And so I had to start my journey in terms of understanding how does somebody actually construct their personal brand. And in that process of kind of reflection and research, one of the things that I thought about was really, why aren't we applying a marketing model to a person? In other words, how we sell products and goods and services, why aren't we using that marketing construct to actually market and advance our own brands? And that really gave birth to this idea of how I'm going to share with you, you think about your brand, using a marketing construct and applying that to you. One of the things that we know in the marketing practice is that there's something called the marketing hourglass, which is basically a way of thinking about the customer experience. So in the initial part of kind of launching a brand or a product, you want to create awareness of that. So you want to create awareness of who you are. You want people to have knowledge about who you are, create interest, and basically here would be the connection with you. As we look at the bottom part of the hourglass, that's the harder part, the relationship management and the propagation. And in that, we basically want to activate people to become loyal to us, as we see down here, and become advocates for ourselves. So if we think about this model of the hourglass and we think about how we actually connect with other people and then basically continue and cultivate that relationship, that becomes an incredible part of how we think about advancing our own respective brands. So in that, I ask you some questions. Would you want to collaborate on a team with you, mentor you? Would you want to work for you? If you met you, what would you think? What is the experience of you? And so in this process, I want you to start thinking about how are all these different interactions you're having with other people? How are other people experiencing your brand? What is that? So in the process, the first thing in the construction and kind of reinvention, if you will, about your personal brand is to actually think about what is your vision for yourself. I like to use the business guru and best-selling author Stephen Covey's quote, "Begin with the end in mind." So where are you actually looking to go? Now, I'm not asking you to think about 20 years from now, where do you want to go? Because things happen in the world that you can't plan. And so what I like people to think about is, where do you actually see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years? That's kind of a doable amount of time. And I don't mean a job title, like I want to be vice president of this or director of that. I mean, what is the kind of work that you envision yourself doing? What's the kind of environment that you want to be working in? And what are the kind of people that you want to be working with? That's a really important, incredible part and powerful part of how you think about establishing your brand. Where are you going and what is that destination? So as we start thinking about that destination, we have to think about some very important elements about ourselves. The first one is your professional qualities and competencies. So you've got this vision established for yourself in terms of where you see yourself going. But in that, you have to have certain capabilities and qualities that distinguish you, that will enable you to get there. So what I tell a lot of students and my clients is identify 3 to 5 professional qualities that you believe distinguish you, whether you're extremely organized, whether you're extremely creative, whether you're a really good collaborator, team player. Identify the 3 to 5 things that you believe distinguish your professional self. Then I ask you to then similarly, what are your values? What do you stand for? Brands have to basically stand for something. And one of the things that we've seen exponentially over the past 2 years during the pandemic is the necessity for brands to have values that they stand for. So do you. So I would ask you to say to yourself, what are the things that I believe in? What are the things that I stand for? What are my foundational values? And identify them. So with that, you have to say, okay, so what do I really care about? Maybe I really care about social justice. Maybe I care about the environment. But identify what are those specific things. So the 3 to 5 values that you have and the 3 to 5 professional qualities and competencies that distinguish you. Now gets the hard part, your proof points. What are proof points? Proof points is irrefutable evidence that something is so. So if we go back to those professional qualities, I would say to yourself, okay, so I think that I'm a really organized person, right? What is the evidence that other people have that you are actually that organized or that creative or that collaborator? What are the things that other people are seeing? Harder is actually to identify the proof points for your values. So you need to identify, okay, if I think I care about the environment and that's something that distinguishes me, what are those proof points that show evidence that you care about the environment? Is it something that where you're just recycling your garbage and separating your bottles and cans from paper and putting that out, which is an important thing to do, but not necessarily something that distinguishes you? Or are you actively engaged in environmental issues and causes that other people see? That creates an important distinction in terms of your brand and what you stand for, proof points. So the other aspect is how you think about your stakeholders. So now you've identified your vision for yourself, your qualities, competencies, and values that you stand for. Then you look at who are my stakeholders. And you have to start thinking about who are the people that are most important in my professional life. In every single class that I teach, and I've been teaching now for 6 years, and I teach 9 different classes between Columbia and New York University. In every single class that I teach, we talk about stakeholders. Why? Because stakeholders are critical to your success. And if you understand the perspective of your stakeholders and can actually really identify what they care about, you'll be that much more successful. If you don't, then that becomes incredibly difficult for you to actually be successful in terms of advancing your brand. But what do we do with stakeholders, whether it's going to a job interview, whether it's in a meeting, or whether it's a one-on-one with our boss? As we start thinking of our stakeholders, we usually address our stakeholders from the perspective of, what we want them to know. I would tell you to turn that around and actually think about, how is this stakeholder perceiving you? What is that experience? So when you're in the job interview and you're very anxious to kind of convey all the critical things about yourself that you want them to know, think about if you were that person on the other side of the table asking questions. What do you think they're looking to hear from you? What do you think they're wanting to know? And that becomes a different conversation. Oftentimes we approach things in terms of what we want them to hear rather than what they want to know. So in the process of advancing your brand, you need to think about how you actually intentionally focus on the care-abouts of those stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? People that have a vested interest in you. They could be your coworkers, your boss, people in other departments, people that you're in school with, your professor. There could be lots of different people that are important stakeholders, and it's important for you to identify where they are. We go through a process in my class when we talk about stakeholders, is we actually map them. We map all the stakeholders that are really important to us, and then we look at them in terms of who's most powerful and who has interest and who has influence over us. And to understand and influence those relationships becomes really critical in terms of your overall success. Then I would say to you, you need to get brand sentiment. So what are actually people thinking about you? All those different pieces of yourself that are out there. What are actually people thinking about you in that process? So I would say, okay, do a real piece of research, a quantitative piece of research where you go out and ask people through a survey, what do you think Jacqueline's professional qualities are? What do you think Jacqueline's values are? What are the ways that you have actually seen her distinguish herself that way? So what are the proof points for Jacqueline in these areas? And so you go through a process of actually getting an assessment of what other people are seeing about you. And that actually helps you understand where you see yourself and where other people see yourself. Because what do we have? Every one of us has gaps. So what happens is you have two lists. You have that list of how you see yourself, those qualities and those values, and you have the list of what other people see you as, those qualities and those values. And there's always a gap. Remember that those two intersecting circles, how you see yourself, how others people see yourself, that's really where this sits. So what you want to actually think about is, how do you think about the gap? In other words, if you see yourself as an extremely organized person and other people aren't perceiving that, but they're perceiving you as a very creative person, you might want to think about, okay, well, then that's something really for me to consider about myself, because this is an unexpected and welcome opportunity for me to build on this. On the other hand, if you really want people to think about your brand as being someone that's extremely organized or collaborative, and that's not showing up, then you have to start thinking about ways in which you can influence other people to see that about you so that it stands out in terms of your brand qualities. So in that process, we also look at our relationships and networks. I worked in very large global corporations for 25 plus years in my career. And when I stopped working in a corporate environment and started teaching and doing other work, one of the things that I actually came to the realization was I needed to work on my relationships and networks. What actually happens to us as we examine our relationships and networks is people have a tendency to affiliate with people like themselves, people who might be similar to them in terms of the profession that they're in, might be similar to them in terms of the age that they are, or other interests, or gender, or whatever. So we go through a process of actually an examination of those people who are also connected to and relate to. We do a little exercise in one of my classes where we actually write down the top 20 relationships we have, people that we actually think are most important in our professional network. And we identify how we met that person and basically how we're connected to them. What we usually find out is that when people examine how they've actually met people that are in their network, these relationships that they have, usually they've reached out to them. They've met them, or through some kind of way of kind of reaching out and getting to know someone, they've created relationships in their network. And while that's a really important trait to actually assert yourself and create new relationships, what do we find? We find that we tend to affiliate and reach out with people like ourselves. So this is an opportunity for each of us to examine who's in our network so we can expand in that. And also in that process, we will be expanding our brand influence. The other thing that's important to think about is that when we are relating to and affiliate with people that are like ourselves, we tend to create what we call an echo chamber. In other words, we hear ourselves being played back to ourselves. Why? Because these people think like us and they agree with us, and we're kind of very similar in perspectives. And while it's great to have people in our network that we agree with, nothing new ever happens with everybody agreeing with each other. Growth only happens when there's controversy and a little conflict and somebody to actually disagree. So it's important to have other people that can be a way of actually getting us to think beyond what we're thinking about in terms of our normal everyday lives. And then I've asked people to look at that content. This is where a lot of people think that social media is really what your brand is. It is a part of your brand, but it is not the entirety of your brand. And social media forms a kind of digital word of mouth for you. And we know over the last 2 years that word of mouth is incredibly important to build any brand. And it's the most powerful component. So I ask people to take a look at their controllable content, the content that you actually put out on social media, whether you're putting it out on Instagram, whether you're putting it out on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you put out your content, what is that? And examine that content and take a look at what you're actually saying about yourself and advancing. And then go back to that list of professional qualities and values, and take a look in terms of the content that you're putting out there about yourself and whether they connect with how you want other people to see your professional qualities and your values. Are they connected or are they different? One of the things that you can do is actually take that content that you're putting out about yourself, that controllable content, and put it in a word cloud so you actually see how you stand out. So in other words, what are the things about your brand that are actually standing out in terms of how other people are seeing you? So do we see words like this? Do we see words like this? Or do you see words like this? So these are really important elements. And it's important to do an inventory of this content on a regular basis. The other thing, as you go forward and start thinking about your brand, you have an opportunity to go forward to create new content. One of the things in the public relations practice we know is people create editorial calendars. You should have one for you. What is the editorial calendar that really supports those distinctive qualities and those distinctive values that you want people to know about? So it's important to start thinking about, how do I create content on an ongoing basis that actually supports that brand, that shows evidence that these things are important to me, and I want people to know that these are the things that I'm actually advancing about myself. And then a critical aspect of this is actually to do listening ongoing. So what is that? That's actually basically staying in touch with those stakeholders, those people in your professional relationships and networks, so that you're actually listening to what they're saying about you or what's being said about you, so that you have an understanding about what is actually being perceived about your brand. Now, one of the things that's very difficult is if you get, and I get this question frequently, is if content is posted about you that you don't like, what do you do about it? In some situations, you may be able to do something about it and have the content taken down. In other cases, you may have no control over doing anything about that content. That's another reason for you to continually be putting up new content about yourself. Because what does that do? It starts pushing down that content, that negative content that may be out there existing about you, that it gets pushed down in search. And we know that people generally, 75% of people do not go to the second page in search. So we know that by creating new content, a drum roll of editorial content, that will actually be really good as you listen to what is being said about you, whether it's positive or not so positive, and being connected to those conversations. And then we basically get to your stories. What do we know about stories? So we know as PR people and marketers that storytelling is incredibly important. That in fact, when a story is told well, using a structure, and we like to use a 3-act structure with a beginning, middle, and end, we know that people remember stories. There's a neuroscience to it in terms of the evocative feeling that we get of the emotions that are actually translated into a story, that we remember them and we're able to recall them. So with your brand, I would ask you to construct some really well thought out stories about yourself that actually embellish on and punctuate those professional qualities and those values that you stand for, so that you're able to pull them out at a ready. They're well conceived, that you can tell about yourself. So for example, if you're in a job interview and they say, well, what's your strongest professional trait? And rather than saying what it is, tell a story that actually shows how you are an extremely organized person, a creative person, a problem solver. And the same thing with your values. So what I like to think about is each of us needs to have a toolbox. I've worked for a number of CEOs, and in that process, we've actually worked on creating and cultivating really good stories that distinguish leadership and distinguish their brands and the organization's brands. These are things that each one of us can do to actually have a much more powerful brand. So as you construct your professional qualities, your values, think about the stories about yourself, and only you can own your stories. And that's also a really authentic and important point that you can use to convey the importance of what these things actually represent in terms of your life and your accomplishments and what you're doing about them. And then there's something that actually created over the course of the pandemic when we went into lockdown and my students and I were basically working remotely. It was a really tough time, and we've, still in the pandemic, but not as kind of in a dire situation as we were in the beginning of the pandemic, where we were basically staying in our apartments and our homes and not leaving. And as a result of that, many of my students were having difficulty connecting and finding jobs and distinguishing themselves. And I thought about what could I do to kind of help them think through kind of distinguishing themselves as they look for jobs. And so I thought about creating what I call a 90-second you, which we got trademarked this past summer. And basically, what is the 90-second you? It's a powerful translation of actually how you communicate your brand in a digital narrative. So why a 90-second you might ask? So basically, as a marketer, we know that video is the most preferred media channel. So what I thought about was, why not apply this to a person, right? And this is not like a YouTube video of somebody pontificating. It actually has a very specific kind of process to it. And basically, by creating a short and powerful piece about yourself, you have an opportunity to create a lasting impression. And in that, it can take many forms in terms of what you highlight, what you showcase about yourself. So why 90 seconds? So through our research, actually, we've determined that it's the right amount of time to tell your story. And the intent in 90 seconds is to create an emotional connection. We know that in 90 seconds, when we actually feel something as an individual, it takes 90 seconds for us to kind of hold on to that emotion when we decide kind of consciously or unconsciously to let go. And so a 90-second kind of time frame is a really optimal time frame to tell your story. A lot of people struggle because how do I tell my story in 90 seconds? It's difficult. And we're going to have May Zhu in a minute. She's going to be sharing her video in terms of what she created. But let me take you through the process. So as we think about this 90-second you, what is it basically? We basically start from the beginning in terms of what are you trying to achieve with this digital piece that you create about yourself? And then in that, who are you trying to influence? So think about those stakeholders, those people out there that you want to influence. Who are they? And then think about, okay, so what am I creating that's actually going to be interesting to that audience? And then in that discussion, what do you want those people to think and feel about you? What do you want them to walk away with? And it's hard to start. So where do you start telling your story? And how do you actually create that? Do you want to start your story when you were born and growing up? Do you want to start it when you were in university? Do you want to start it when you're in high school? You need to start, how do you actually embark on this journey of telling your story? And then you identify when you have your starting point, what are the moments that you want to capitalize on? Filmmakers and screenwriters have something called a beat sheet, and each beat actually moves their story forward. So your beats are your moments. Each moment in this 90-second piece is actually used to kind of tell your story, and each beat moves your story forward towards kind of your end result. And then in that, you have to identify the words that you want to use. Words matter a lot. And the words that we select to use when we communicate say a lot about our brand, our character, the kind of person we are, how people affiliate with us. And so because this is such a short piece, and because in this piece you should be the narrator of it, the words that you select to tell your story in 90 seconds are really important. In that, you have to select the images that you want to support those words. So as you start your journey to start, where do I want to start telling my story? What are those moments that I want to use? And then what are the images that are actually going to be reflective of those moments? Those are incredibly important to kind of discern. So you have to go back into your archives. And a lot of my students, when we were working on this they needed to find their old photos. They needed to find videos of themselves. They need to identify what are the things that they could use to convey who they are. And then in that, you then have to record your narrative. I like people to record the narrative in their own voice. And that voice becomes really important in terms of the tone that you use. Do you want it to be an energized tone? Do you want it to be a serious tone? Do you want it to be a straightforward tone? Do you want it to be a friendly tone? So you have to start thinking about how do you actually want to record that narrative and the tone of voice that you want to use. And then basically, then you have to put it all together in the edit, right? And that becomes hard for some people because not everybody is a professional film editor. We will see with Mays that we actually used a professional film editor for her piece. So she was lucky. So I don't want to kind of not represent how this was put together, but many of my students are really extremely good editors. And so what I find is that the edit becomes really the important point because they actually take all these images, these words, these moments in time, and put it together in 90 seconds. I will tell you that I've had people say, well, Jacqueline, I can't do it in 90 seconds. I need 5 minutes. Most people are not going to listen to 5 minutes. We know on YouTube that if people are not interested, it takes them about 1.8 seconds to move away. So you got to grab them. And so it's really important as you think about this video and constructing a digital narrative yourself, that you think about, again, what's the experience of watching it? You might think it's really interesting, but somebody else might think, I don't find this as interesting as the person creating this, and I'm not going to watch 5 minutes of it. So that's why 90 seconds is a good amount of time to actually convey that brand of yours and tell your story. So in that, we're going to actually have May Zhu, so by way of background, May is a working professional in London right now. She was a student of mine in the Masters of Science program at New York University in integrated marketing, and she actually had me for 2 classes. And I'm really excited that she's going to be joining us and telling you a little bit about her piece and the background in terms of how she created this. So I'm going to turn this over to May right now.
Hello, everyone. My name is May. Thank you, Professor Schreier, for the introduction. So I actually just graduated from the integrated marketing program that Professor just mentioned in May this year. And I moved from New York to London, and I'm now working professional at Kepler as a digital marketing analyst. And so I worked with Professor Schreier on my 90-second You video, which our professionals here will help us to get this video up in a second. Can you play that video now? Thanks. Always curious about new things and never hesitate to take the first step. My name is May Zhu, and welcome to my 90-second You video. I came into this world very curious, and that's still me. I was born in Tangshan, China, and moved to New York City at 19. Bilingual, I'm shaped by both the Chinese and American cultures, therefore I'm a highly responsible team player while also being empowered by individuality. Living in New York City has opened my eyes, exploring different industries, embracing new challenges, and welcoming intelligent and interesting people into my life. Traveling allows me to put myself in unfamiliar situations and learn something new about myself and the rest of the world. I'm also a multitasking chef, creating new dishes and bringing people happiness through the food I make. Patient, caring, and empathetic, I'm my friends and family's go-to person for life advice. It also makes me happy when helping others and doing my part in causes including social services, environmental sustainability, and education. I'm a lifelong learner, storyteller, and strategic thinker. I've always been open to possibilities and look forward to more serendipities in the future. This is Mei Zhu. This is my 90-second video. Thank you so much. I'm kind of still very moved by this whole 90 seconds of me. So I hope my face doesn't look so strange to all of you after watching that piece. So I started to work on this piece, as Professor mentioned, during the summer of 2020, when this pandemic first started. And as a master's student back then, my end goal with this piece was to, one, expand my networks, and two, to get a new job in digital marketing. And I wanted to add more dimensions to my online presence and influence my potential networks and perhaps potential employers as well. So after watching this piece, I want them to feel like that I'm so much more than just the words and bullet points on my resumes, that I'm real, outgoing, empathetic, and very curious. And I will bring all of these values with me when it comes to a professional setting. So with that, where did I start to craft the whole piece? So I sat down and started to reflect back on my past 20 years or so of life. So what moments have come to define who I really am today? So what aspects do I want to spotlight throughout all of those experiences that I've had in the past 20 years and feel comfortable to share with other people publicly? Do I have pictures or even videos to help me to draft and basically showcase all of those stories? So I started with a very unnecessarily elongated version of narrative. And after working with Professor Schreier here for a couple of refinement sessions, I finally arrived at a very concise and interesting copy that you just heard. Also, I cherry-picked a lot of photos from my personal galleries, and thanks to my beloved family and friends who helped me to take a lot of photos throughout my life. And yeah, also for places that I don't have a perfect photo from myself, I just used photos from open source websites like Unsplash and Flickr. So as Professor mentioned here, with the help of a professional video editor, Vinny, I put my voiceover, images, and background music all together and then got the first draft of 90-second U video. However, editing it was never a straightforward process. So with rounds of peer reviews with my fellow classmates and refinement sessions with Professor Schreier here, I finally came up with that version that you just saw. So last summer, after getting the first draft, after getting the first version of the 90-second U video, I have then put up this video to my portfolio website and included the link to my resume as well. And fast forward to this summer, when I graduated from my master's program, when I started to looking for a job, during the first interview I've ever had with my now supervisor here at Kepler, she kindly mentioned that she had actually watched this 90-second U video, which was lying on the website forever. And she was so kind to mention that to me. And she actually knew that I was interested in cooking. And she mentioned that my company actually has an education fund that employees can use to learn more about their hobbies and passions outside of work. So I could use that kind of education stipend to learn more about cooking if I like to. So at that moment, I really felt that this 90-second U piece helped me to stand out from all the potential candidates for this job. And basically, it helped me to leave an impression to people that I'm a real person, that I have my passions and hobbies, that I'm so much more than just the bullet points on my resume. So I'll say this version is definitely not the perfect final version. I'll definitely, going forward, I'll definitely make adjustments whenever needed and use this as one of the great starting points to maximize my personal brand online. So now I'm gonna hand it back to Professor Schreier here and let her continue on the personal branding part.
Thank you, May. That's a really powerful piece. I mean, and I think that May points out some really important points in terms of what she shared, which is that, you know, first of all, our brands are dynamic. They're ever changing. And there are things, the person you are at 20 is not the person that you are at 30 and so on. And so this particular piece will change over time. And I think the other thing that she mentioned is that when we started this process, and it was a process when I was working with, I think, about 8 students over the course of the summer doing this 90-second U, what was really interesting is, you know, each of them came up with a script, and we spent hours kind of refining the script and how can we actually make this better. And in the process, they learned a lot about themselves. I certainly learned a lot about them too, but also they just identified what did they want to be distinctive about them. And I think the operative word that May just shared with you was real. That people really want to connect with a real person. And so we feel something about her. We'll remember those things. And in fact, when she went to work, her new manager called out the fact that she's a chef, she's a aspiring person in the kitchen, and remembered that about her. So it was a really memorable thing and a very powerful thing. The thing that you can do with this piece is actually attach it to your resume if you want to and have people watch it, or provide the link, or send it out in advance. It's really a very different and creative way of expressing who you are and becoming much more memorable than just a paper resume with perhaps reference letters that are wonderful, but are not the same and distinctive about you. And this really shows also a creative as well as insightful self that you present to other people. So if we think about that in terms of your brand, so that's a really opportunistic thing for each of us to do, is to create this 90-second you about ourselves. But the other thing that I want you to keep in mind about your brand is that there's moments in time. There are moments that you're going to have in your career, anybody has in their career, that are going to cause you to kind of pause and say, what do I want to do in this moment? How do I actually want to make more of this? And they could be small moments or bigger moments in terms of whether it's a career opportunity, whether it's something that you've been invited and engaged to speak at an event, or whether it's just simply that you want to kind of stand out in a different way based on something that's happening at work. And you have to identify what these moments in time are so that you can actually capitalize on them and make the most of them. Because as you find in your career, you're going to have lots of different decisions to make in terms of where do you want to go and how do you do that. And so, you know, it becomes really important to think about, as you're going down life's road, how do you make decisions in terms of where you want, where do you want to go and what that is? I would ask you to go back to that vision. So as you identified early on in this process, what is that vision that you have for yourself? Are these, these things, these opportunities that present themselves in your career and your distinctiveness about your brand, are they something that are actually important to you or not? And in that conversation with yourself and in that reflection, I ask you to actually think about your values. So as we go down this process of building our brands, are those values, are they really the values that we have? And then in light of the decisions that we have to make about ourselves, let the values that you actually embrace be your guide. And you may find in that conversation with yourself that maybe your values need to be reflected on and reconsidered in terms of what you stand for and what's important to you. So these moments in time become pivotal points in our lives in terms of not only determining our career success, but determining our success as individuals. And so that becomes a critical moment for us to think about in terms of how do I want to live my life and advance myself forward in this world of ours, right? But one of the things that I find frequently, and I talk to my students a lot about this, is oftentimes we don't think big enough. And that's really where you have to step back from yourself and think, am I thinking big enough? Lots of times in kind of presentations and assignments that my students have, I tell them to think about what they're doing and then think bigger. You need to do this with yourself. So in the part of the process of your journey, think about, am I willing to take a little bit of a risk on myself? I'm willing to put myself out there. Think a little bit bigger in terms of what the outcome of that might be, and start thinking about, where do you see yourself headed? what's really important to you, and actually how you want to distinguish yourself and your brand. These are all critical moments in terms of establishing, embellishing, and advancing, cultivating, and ultimately creating that ultimate brand experience of you, right? And I would like to say that I think about this often. There's a fantastic artist that I became aware of this year who I didn't know. Her name is Neal, and she was born in 1900 and she died in the 1980s. And she's a New York-based artist. And one of the things that she had a fantastic life and fantastic work out there. And then in this collection of, I think it was over 100 paintings. What distinguished Neal in part was the fact that most of the paintings were of people that she met. So in this artwork, whether it was, two young sisters who lived down the hall, a gay couple that she happened to meet, or a woman and her grandchild, she made the most of what I like to think of every action being an opportunity. So you never know where someone is going to end up in your life. Similarly, they don't know where you're going to end up in life. And so every interaction is indeed an opportunity for each of us to actually think about it and actually underscore and punctuate those brand of ours. Before I sign off and we take some questions, I wanted to share with you all something that I'm working on, and Peter was good enough to mention in the beginning. I'm creating with a group of other people, but I've kind of founded this not an organization. I like to think of it an experience. It's called the Global Brand Convergence, which will be held next year, and you'll be able to sign up for it in January, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So basically, the goal of this was to create a global collaborative annual experience, and it's not just a series of presentations, it's actually an experience for people who are in higher education, whether they be students and faculty, as well as people who are in the communities of practice in public relations, marketing, and communications. And the purpose of this is to create a connected global community amongst these people to share ideas, innovations, concepts, and advance them in the classroom experience as well as with each other. So what is this going to be? It's basically going to be a free online experience. It's going to be essentially a group of either individual presenters, global experts and thinkers, along with, in addition to that, we're going to have cultural performances from the arts, whether they be music, dance, and other forms of art that are actually going to be performed from people and artists throughout the world that are going to actually be inserted throughout the course of this 3-hour experience. We're also going to have video roll-in segments that are going to highlight content that we have and actually distinguish this in a different way. In addition to that, we're going to have real-time reporting from my students who are going to actually advance the content that's being shared during this April 21st event. And that's also to cultivate engagement among those who are actually attending or not attending. And the intent is to create a connected community amongst people that we hope will grow over time. And this will be a very fast-paced and energized session. Some of the topics that we're looking to include are these listed here: storytelling through the lens, compelling narrative from the filmmaker's 3-act structure, social entrepreneurs building your sphere of influence and social impact, investigative journalism, its global renaissance, marketing the complicated, how to demystify the misunderstood, marketing an old brand in a new market, crisis in our post-pandemic world, 5 years out, what recent grads are doing and what we can learn from them, and finally, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and machine learning, how tech tools are dictating the future. We've got some fantastic speakers already lined up, from people who are marketing Bitcoin to filmmakers to people that are actually marketing a very important streaming platform in a different part of the world. And we've got some really great, interesting investigative journalists that are also going to be joining us for this conversation, as well as we've got some incredible performers that are going to be sharing their art with us during this experience that are come from all over the world. And importantly, I'm very honored that the Global Alliance is a partner with this event. And also we have the International Association of Business Communicators, Moving Bits, who is based in Singapore. They are my film partner, and they're actually going to be producing all the video and film segments that are going to be inserted. They are an outstanding firm that's based in Singapore. YY Ventures, which is run by a former student of mine who's in Bangladesh, who his name is Shazib Islam, and he was an Obama scholar at Columbia, and he is a partner and as well as a speaker at this event, as well as the Africa Brand Summit. A friend of mine, Sally Wong, who runs that, has been ongoing for the last about 5 years. They are also a partner in this event. So and we actually have some other partnerships that have yet to be announced. So I hope that all of you will consider joining. It's going to be available for registration through our website that's going to be launched in January, as well as through my LinkedIn, and the Global Alliance will be communicating that as well as my other partners here. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is to connect with May and I on LinkedIn. And before we go into questions and answers, I just wanted to wish everybody best wishes for the holiday season, whatever holiday that you're celebrating, and in the new year in 2022. So now we will move into questions.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline and May. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed the presentation. I took a lot of notes, as I'm sure many of the folks that are joining us today. What struck me, Jacqueline, is when early in my career, we had something called the elevator speech. So it was the idea of, if you're in a elevator with an executive and you want to tell them about yourself, you have about 90 seconds to do it. But what you just went through, I wish I had as a resource early in my career, because it's far and away more sophisticated, and I love the marketing construct that you took us through. One thing that came to mind though is that where do you, now that you've worked with May and several students and folks early in their career, where do you see folks struggle during the process? Is it in the area of proof points, values? I was just curious, is there a theme or advice as people are going through this, where they might not feel totally comfortable, and advice for them during that process?
Well, that's a really important question. I think that and I've done a lot of workshops on this personal brand kind of construct that I put together years ago when I started talking about the subject. And what I've found is that for most people, the thing that is real, the first three elements are really hard. I would say identifying a vision for themselves, because people don't really think about that. They might think about a job that they want to aspire to get, like their next move, or ultimately they might want to be a chief communication officer or a chief marketing officer. But people don't really think about, how do I actually envision kind of the situation that I want to be in working? And that's a different question. And it requires a lot of reflection and, thinking about, what's important to me. And this personal brand process is really a lot of that, of introspection and reflection. The second thing is, I think it's easier for people to identify their professional qualities, because people generally tend to know what they think they're good at or what they think distinguishes them. The values become hard, because the values are things that are really visible to other people. And so with that, the connection, and you mentioned it, are the proof points. So what's that evidence that, Jacqueline cares about social justice? Like, do people actually see that? Or it's just something I know and, I'm involved, but nobody sees? So the harder part is actually taking what you care about and making that visible. And most people have to work on that. I get so many notes for this from people that have been in my workshop. I did a number of these workshops for the Columbia Executive Education program, for their women's leadership program. And I get a lot of notes from the women that were in that program saying, how do I find my proof points? And I said, you don't find them. You actually may have to create them, because they may not exist other than in your mind. And so that's a great place to exist, but no one's seeing that. So the evidence becomes really important. I think the social media part is less difficult. I think, many people have grown up with social media, or they're continually engaged in it. I think, though, a scrubbing of the social media becomes important, because in some respects, people have started, and I've seen this even on LinkedIn, people start putting everything out there about themselves. And you have to think about, is this my professional site, or is this just kind of like my me site? And LinkedIn is a very powerful place for people to actually not only put content out about themselves, but also connect with other people to create relationships with other people. So that's a critical component in terms of some of the things that people need to kind of think about with their brand early on. How do I actually create that vision for myself? What are my values and the evidence of those and my professional competencies? And then how do I actually extend my network to have actually a more diverse, more engaged, and ultimately more influential network of people?
And one of the concepts that you brought up, and I think it was around controllable content, but this idea of like an editorial calendar, which I found really interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about that? But how does it, almost like sort of an audit of, and I'm assuming this also will be an input as you evolve your personal brand. These are things that as you gain more experience, more, open up your new networks. But could you say a little bit more about that?
So as we post content about ourselves, and sometimes it's haphazard, right? We just put stuff out there. We win an award, like somebody got a new job, we want to underscore something else. I think it becomes really important for us to also kind of think about, okay, you've got that vision for yourself, where you see yourself going. You've got these professional qualities and you've got these values. When you put content out about yourself that's actually more from an editorial standpoint, what do I actually want to put out there on a regular basis that connects with these professional qualities and these values that actually to the world shows evidence of what I'm doing? An editorial calendar can provide you with an organized way of doing that. So for example, if you want to talk about, for example, I'm very involved with the arts. And so I regularly post things about the arts that are part of something that I care about, I'm committed to, and actually talk about a lot in my classes, and it's part of who I am. So that becomes an important aspect of how actually the content that I actually advance that connects with my own brand. So as people start thinking about and doing an inventory of what they put out about their social media, and usually it's a pretty interesting kind of revelation for a lot of people. Oftentimes people will have channels that have become dormant or somewhat dormant, and they don't really use them. If they're dormant, then no one's paying attention to you because you're not putting anything out there. That's really important. The other aspect about it is what you are putting out there, is it supporting those things? And if it is, that's great. If they're not, your qualities and competencies and your values, if they're not, you can actually create a calendar of identifying every Monday, I'm going to post something about this, about the environment, or about social justice, or about the arts, or about the importance of being a collaborative person. So if they connect with those things that are important to you, or leadership aspects. So if it connects with kind of how you want other people to see you, they see you're commenting on it. You will also be that much more inclined to be interesting to people that actually are involved with those areas, and you can create connections that way. I can't tell you how many times my postings that I put out about things that I'm interested in or doing have actually given me affiliations with people that were quite unexpected because of it. So it's also a wonderful way for other people that you don't know to connect with you as well.
Yeah. Well, I know we have a few questions coming in, so I'm gonna take some of the audience's questions, and one of the first ones that came in was. I explored different related industries in the past and have developed a number of skills along the way. And I think it's a great question. How do I determine which 3 to 5 qualities or skills do I want to focus on? So prioritizing those, and I know you talked a little bit about that in your presentation, but if you say a little bit more about how do you determine which ones to really distinguish yourself?
Okay, so there's a few ways of looking at this question, and it's an important question. Because you may have a list of 10, you're good at a lot of things, right? So think about it this way. Think about what's that vision for yourself. And then of these professional qualities and competencies, which are the ones that are strongest to help you get there? And so think about it very strategically. What do you want to focus on that's actually going to do the best good for your own brand and your own kind of professional future self? So I think oftentimes we don't think of ourselves strategically enough. And, organizations, brands do that. They're very strategic and they focus on their essential and, basically important qualities. we need to do that too in terms of getting the outcome that we're trying to influence. So that vision for yourself, if you think that, in that list of things that you're really good at, what's the things that are going to stand out to really help you get where you want to go? Is it being a strategic person? Is it being a creative person? Is it being a collaborator? Is it being, someone that's really good at ideating? Whatever those things are, what you think are most important, that you feel comfortable with. The other thing is you have to feel comfortable with them, because you may want to go to a place that doesn't necessarily support the things that you're really good at. You got to think about that. Like, is that a place that I really want to go? Or do I really need to rethink that destination? Or do I really need to rethink myself in this conversation with myself in terms of what do I actually want to do about this in terms of influencing that ultimate destination? So, you're going to have to make some choices, because the fact of the matter is, if you start selecting more than like 3 or 5 kind of strong brand qualities, and you say, oh, I really have like 8, like I have 8 really good things, then we start getting what I call a schizophrenic brand. Like, you're not really sure what you are. You have so many different things, like people don't really know what to focus on. So focus becomes really important. There's lots of models about how businesses are built, whether they focus on a particular thing, or they become really good at a specific thing, or they want to be kind of a number of things. But I like focus. So by focusing and looking at like 3, I would start with 3 and then maybe building it to 5. Those are really the ones that you want to focus on, and that help you kind of get to that destination in a smoother path. In a much smoother path.
So another question that's come in is around, is it possible to remake or redo your personal brand after you put it out there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's very little that people, in my longer talks that I give, we talk about comebacks. And I like to use the example of Martha Stewart. That's a comeback brand.
Yeah, that's a comeback for sure.
That's a comeback brand. Now she's like best friends with Snoop Dogg. I mean, who would have thought that, right, 20 years ago? So I think that as we think about, there's very little that you can't come back from. I'll just say, there are some things which I'm sure nobody on this call is kind of has in their background that they can't come back from. So if, for example, you have a brand that you want to reinvent, you want to recreate yourself, you have to start thinking at the beginning, and you have to start thinking with that Covey quote, begin with the end in mind. So what are you trying to influence? Where do you see that? Where's that new you? Where do you want that to be? And then in that, you then have to do the reflection of, okay, so what are the things that I need to do to get there? Are there some professional things that I need to do that go outside of kind of my professional competencies that I've got? And are there some things from a value standpoint that I need to work on? So you actually have to create almost your own new persona. And in that new kind of characterization of you, then that plan then needs to be much more rigorous, because you're actually may have to do some very specific work, whether it's getting additional education, whether it's getting a different kind of job, whether it's actually connecting with associations, expanding your network, lots of different things. But one of the things that you can always start with small steps, whether it's starting to actually post content about that kind of new you that you want to create, that you want people to kind of see you as. There's lots of small things that you can do, can kind of dip your toe in the water and start moving forward without feeling like very uncomfortable that you're trying to do too much. Because you can't all of a sudden one day be one person and the next day be another person that people perceive. You have to start making very intentional, very specific, and the operative word is very strategic steps that help get you there.
Yeah, and I would think that it has to look like more of an evolution, not something that's, as you say, sort of maybe a bit schizophrenic.
But I will tell you that, I mean, I think that I'm, for lack of a better example, I'm a good example. I mean, I was a corporate executive for many years. I worked in large global public companies and did that, and had teams all over the world and lived that life. And then 6 years ago, my company was bought. I decided to change my life and do something else. And so my kind of focus was, I just wanted to be in a situation where I was doing interesting work with interesting people. That was kind of really what I wanted to do. And I started kind of using that lens as my guide. So I think that each of us have an opportunity to influence that result, but you just have to really be open to the fact that, and a possibility that you might be wrong about yourself, that you may actually not have really considered all the possibilities for yourself. And that's the other thing. Reconsideration is also critical in this process.
Yeah. So another question that's come in, and I was also thinking this too. I think when you're talking about stakeholders, and it made me think of this concept of perspective taking. The idea that you're sort of looking from the other person's eyes and getting that sense of how they perceive you. And so the question was, how do you tools, strategies to get insight on others' perception about you? So how, and I think you mentioned a little bit about that, but if you could just talk a little bit more about how do you, and maybe, some are more adept at this than others. And if it's not something that that becomes you don't, intuitively kind of, what are some things that people can do to kind of, to get a better sense of that perception?
So it's really important to do the research. Brands do it. They get perception about brands. We should do it. And I'm not talking about a 360-degree feedback that organizations do about somebody in a job and getting everybody in the organization kind of chime in about what they kind of think about you in your respective role. I'm talking about identifying probably between 15 and 20 stakeholders that you have that are important to you. And I would actually exclude your boss just because I don't necessarily think that's a comfortable place for them, but you could include your boss. The process that I like to recommend that people use is actually you use a kind of a tool, a survey tool, whether it's SurveyMonkey or something like that, which is free if you don't have too many questions and you don't have too many respondents. And so you construct about a 10-question survey that goes out to your respective stakeholder community, and you actually ask them the questions. So you say, when you think of Peter, what are the 3 professional qualities that you think about Peter? And then when you think about Peter, what are the values that you think, the 3 values that you identify with him? Then comes the harder question. What are the accomplishments that you see for Peter in his professional qualities? What are the distinguishing aspects of his values that you've actually observed? And so what we usually get the list of the 3 qualities and the 3 values. Harder is the accomplishments. And that's a telling point, because if people aren't seeing your accomplishments, you need to make them more visible. And I don't mean chest pounding and saying how great I am. I mean just making them more observable. So in that process, as you think about doing this, the research is really critical in the beginning. So you need to kind of send this research tool out to people, with a letter basically saying that you're basically asking them, enlisting them to help you in kind of working on your personal brand as part of your professional development. And so in that, you appreciate them taking the next 5 to 10 minutes to fill out the survey, which is anonymous. It has to be anonymous and, and confidential, and also tell them they have 3 days to do it or whatever. You don't want to give them a month. And you get the results back. Usually in any type of survey, we find the industry standard is about, you get a 30% response rate, 35% response rate. So I would say with something like this, if you've got a very engaged community, you'll get a higher group. If you don't get anybody responding, that's telling too. So that's important, because what that research does, it actually sets you on a kind of path of, this is what I think of myself, and this is what other people. Remember that those 2 overlapping circles?
Yep.
That's where you get it. And so you say, okay, I'm seeing myself this way, and they're seeing myself this way. How do I need to influence that overlap, and what do I need to work on? On the other hand, one of the things that I found, and this is a first workshop I did for a very large publishing company back when I started doing this personal brand work, is I got into a workshop with about 30 people at this company. And there was one guy who was in the IT department. And he thought nobody saw what he did. And he said, I sent out the survey to people, and I didn't think I was going to get much of a response. What he actually got was something really remarkable. He got something that really talked to the fact that people really did identify his work and really did appreciate and notice what he did. And it was very self-affirming for him. It was a very positive moment for him, because he thought, here I am in this job that's kind of like a back office job where I think people don't really notice me. And in fact, they really appreciate me. And they actually identified the accomplishments and the things that he was actually contributing to the organization and to them. So it's not about finding fault with you or criticism. It actually can be a very, very positive, self-affirming experience. In addition, they may identify qualities and values for yourself that you didn't see were visible, you didn't think were visible to other people, or even thought of yourself. And so I know that when I started doing this work and I sent something out about myself, I got some qualities, like people thought I had a lot of energy. I never would have identified that, but that was a thing that kept coming back and back. She has a lot of energy, a lot of energy. And I would have not have put that on my list. And so it was like, okay, so do I want to capitalize on this quality, or do I want to actually kind of work on some of the others? That becomes an important conversation with yourself in terms of thinking about this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, some of that is a bit of a segue into and this is unfortunately the last question we have time for, but you kind of reconciling that dissonance between, you know, how you see yourself and how others see you. And so the question is, how should I adjust, you know, how I see myself, or what do I do to change, you know, how people see me and how I want them to see me. And so I would imagine, you know, some of this research about yourself, you know, leads to, you know, maybe some aha moments as you were just talking about, but any additional recommendations on kind of reconciling that?
I think a critical part for anybody's journey in their life is really just being a lifelong learner. I mean, just being open to new concepts about yourself. You know, it's often said we don't learn anything by talking, we learn a whole lot more by listening. And I think actually to be observers of other people, that we think are really, really strong brands and qualities about them that we want to maybe embrace ourselves or think about more specifically about ourselves. Those are really wonderful ways. But I think the fact of the matter is that, you know, as I said earlier, and I play this in my classes at the beginning of every semester, this great video from a colleague who's at Stanford, who talks about the fact that we have to be open to the possibility that we're wrong. And that if we think we know everything, we can't learn anything. So the fact of the matter is that applies to ourselves. And sometimes we think we know everything about ourselves, when in fact, we might not necessarily be so clear on that. So we need to be kind of always exploring. We need to be open. We need to be thinking about ourselves in a bigger way, not limiting ourselves. And really, this is an important journey. I wish I had thought about this in my earlier part of my career, because I think I would have made some different moves. But it's never too late, as I said earlier, to be that person that you think you should have been. And I think that's the important thing, is to, you know, just start with kind of today and move forward in terms of how you want to influence that professional self and the life that you lead as a professional.
Well, Jacqueline, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much to you and May for a fantastic presentation. I want to just a quick plug again for Jacqueline's conference, Global Brand Convergence, and just also remind everyone that I believe this is all recorded, so it will be available for replay. And you know, I've learned a ton in the last hour, so I just really appreciate your time and all the folks that have joined us today and the organizers. So thanks so much. And you know, it's I guess a real honor to be part of the first student and this Impact, the Global Youth Public Relations and Communications Convention. So with that, I want to just thank everyone. And again, I'm Peter Finn, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you for having us.